Hi. In order for an election to be free and fair, there are two critical conditions that need to be met. Two critical conditions must be met. Number one, the campaign conditions need to be free from intimidation and manipulation. Number two, the vote counting in and of itself needs to be above reproach. This means that it must be done transparently and according to international best practice. If any one of those two critical conditions is not met, that election cannot be deemed free and fair. Now, African dictators are focusing on using all of their tools to frustrate the first process. They are trying to frustrate the election process before election day. Because if you do enough to alter the state of the competition before the election day, then the election day in and of itself becomes irrelevant. Now, there are four tactics that have been perfected by African dictators. Number one, violence. They unleash the army and the police on the civilians of that particular state. They do this to create an atmosphere of fear and suffocation. They do this to remove hope. The reality is, if you unleash enough violence on a daily basis upon the civilians, you beat them down day after day after day after day, what happens is that they stop believing that things can be better. They stop believing in the democratic process, and then they give in to the despair. And what that does is that they no longer believe that anything can be better, and they accept you, the dictator. They accept trying to find a way to survive under the banner of the dictatorship and no longer trying to find a way out of the dictatorship. So violence is a critical tool of dictators across this African continent. That's number one. Number two, they use the institutions of the courts to arrest and frustrate their political opponents and political activists. In a constitutional democracy, the right to speak about your political thoughts is sacrosanct. The right to share those political thoughts is sacrosanct. The right to organize around those political thoughts, to form political parties, to form movements, to actually protest around your political thoughts, ideologies, and beliefs is sacrosanct. But what do dictators do? Dictators frequently arrest politicians, activists who try to actually exercise those particular rights. And they do this to remove their ideas from society, to remove that discourse, but also to slow them down, to slow down those activists. They also do this to journalists. Any journalist who dares to point out the corruption of a dictatorship is going to see the inside of a jail cell. Any journalist who challenges the implementation and execution of a dictatorship around their mandate of administration, that person is going to be arrested. So dictators arrest, they harass, and they use the judicial institutions to make sure that their opponents are always in and out of court, in and out of prison. And this just removes any pattern of frequency in their organizations because their organizations don't have that flow. That's the second thing that dictators do. Number three, they shut down free and democratic platforms of discourse. So they shut down the internet, they shut down social media applications, Twitter, Facebook, WhatsApp, Telegram, Signal, you name it, they shut it down. Why do they do this? They do this because they want to be able to control the discourse. They want to be able to push propaganda across the nation without being challenged. It's a critical tool of a dictatorship to shut down the internet at critical times. They either shut it down when there are protests in their particular territory, or they shut it down days before elections. Number four, they control the access to the state media because many people don't have access to smartphones. They don't have access to the internet because the internet is expensive. So they rely on state radio, they rely on state television. But dictators use state media in a nefarious way to preserve their power. One thing that they do is they exclude political opponents from accessing state media. Then, number two, they make sure that state media only praises them, only speaks of the country as being positive, and then the West and external actors are trying to undercut the democracy. So they always blame the outside, they always blame the opponents, and then they always glorify the dictator. Any dictatorship that wants to survive makes sure that they praise themselves through state media. Now, this is exactly what has been happening in Uganda under the dictatorship of Yoweri Museveni. Yoweri Museveni has been in power since 1986. That's probably longer than most of you have been alive, and some of you were children when Yoweri Museveni came into power. For 35 years, he has been using all of the tactics that I've outlined above. He has been using violence against his citizens. He has been harassing and arresting his political opponents. He has been shutting down the platforms which are democratic for discourse, the internet, Twitter, WhatsApp, Facebook. He has shut them all down. He has killed supporters. He has killed activists. He has killed people who have dared to oppose him. The irony of the conduct of Yoweri Museveni is that he entered politics to fight the tyranny of Idi Amin. He entered politics to provide freedom to the people of Uganda. But once he had tasted power, the power made him drunk, the power made him an oppressive and brutal dictator. They say that you either die a hero or you live long enough to see yourself become the villain. You either die a hero or you live long enough to see yourself become the villain. And this is true with Yoweri Museveni. This is exactly what has happened. And he is now trying to steal an election. He has been arresting Bobi Wine. People have been killed left, right, and center in Uganda. The internet, as we speak, is shut down in Uganda. Twitter, all of these platforms are shut down in Uganda. But what I want to say is that we're not powerless as a global community. We're not powerless as young Africans. These elections, the ones that have basically been stolen by Yoweri Museveni, they still need to be recognized by the international community. They still need to be recognized by the African Union. And this is where our voices as the African youth can be loudly heard, because we have a voice. And the agenda of those who are powerful across Africa is to make us believe we don't have a voice. We have a voice. We have these accounts on Twitter. We have accounts on Facebook. And we should use our voice on social media and all other platforms to hold African leaders to account for them not to declare these elections free and fair. For too long, African dictators have just simply been rubber stamping elections. They have been rubber stamping elections across the board in Zimbabwe, in Malawi, everywhere. In Malawi, in 2019, the incumbents actually were changing, ballot results with TPEX. They were literally cancelling out results and writing favorable results. And the African Union actually said, oh no, everything is cool, everything is fine, no problem, we accept the election results. And it took the Malawian Supreme Court to have the courage to actually say, hey, you can't TPEX election results. Those election results were not free and fair. And the African Union was left with egg on its face. But I think that now, in 2021, we, the youth, have to put pressure on the African Union to say, do not recognize any election that has not been free and fair. We must lobby the leaders of every nation, especially the ones that are in election years, the ones that are trying to show youth that they care about our voices. We need to be vocal. The reality is, and the urgent crisis is, we need to remove dictatorship from Africa. The biggest obstacle to African progress has been these leaders, these brutal dictators who think that the states that they run are their personal kingdoms, who think that they have a God-given entitlement to govern the affairs of Africa. These leaders need to be told that we are no longer going to tolerate dictators in Africa. We can't go on with dictators. We can't go on with all of these old men who oppress, suppress, repress, and steal from the future of Africa, the future that we deserve, a future that we will be living in. The reality is we cannot have dictators in Africa by 2030, and it has to start now. It has to start with us as the African youth calling out the African Union, calling out the institutions that normalize these dictatorships. So, for one, what Donald Trump did was atrocious, trying to steal and subvert an election. But what these African dictators do is far worse. It's far worse. They are consistently stealing elections. They are consistently inciting and implementing violence against their civilians. And we, as young Africans, need to call that out. We need to challenge these platforms that removed Trump, to remove these dictators. I don't think that a dictator should enjoy the benefits and privileges of something that they deny their own citizens. If a dictator shuts down the internet, that dictator must be shut out of the internet. Yoweri Museveni does not deserve to have a Twitter account. All of the other dictators do not deserve to have a Twitter account. But really, let's stand in solidarity with Bobby Wine. Let's stand in solidarity with the people of Uganda. And let's be ready to challenge all of the institutions that normally normalize and sanitize the elections that are not free and fair. Because right now, Bobby Wine and the people of Uganda are going through the most. But we don't have to sit aside. We can actually lend our voice. It's all we have to do. We're not going to face arrest. We're not going to face the prosecution of the Ugandan military. This is a low bar. And it's the least that we can do to show these dictators across the continent that their time is up. That's where I'm going to leave it. That's really all I wanted to say is let's stand in solidarity with everyone who is under the repression of a dictatorship. And the first person who needs to get that message in 2021 is Yoweri Museveni. Peace.